Welcome to the Valley College Connection, where John Kawai and Scott Wigan, two Valley professors, engage in a conversation about success with educators and students. Each week, they'll sit down with a different guest to find out ways each of us have had to plan, persevere, and overcome to where we are now. The show will also highlight resources and services that are working to make a difference at Valley College.
All right, today we are joined by Professor Pete Lopez of the Chicano Studies Department at Los Angeles Valley College. Thank you so much for joining us, Pete.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Pete, we wanted to hear your story about the path that led you to Valley College, and we were hoping that you'd take us as far back as you could and share with us the steps along the way.
Absolutely. Okay. You got it. So let me start. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for this invitation. Maybe way overdue, and so I thank you for extending that invitation, Scott, because sometimes I can become lost in my own office and the hustle and bustle to and from work. But yeah, I want my students to you guys to get an idea of who I am. And yeah, I'm an Angelino, third generation Angelino. My grandmother was born. Well, my grandmother was actually born in New Mexico, but my parents, my father was born here, and I was born here. Children are born here. My granddaughter is born here. So we're 5 generations, strong. And so I grew up in not technically East LA. I grew up in what we like to say Nela, which is Northeast LA, along Lincoln Heights area, Cypress Park, right adjacent to Dodger Stadium. And I was born in Lincoln Heights. I'm a proud LA County baby in 1959. And I was baptized at the oldest church in Los Angeles back in 1781 when it was established in the late 1790s. And so, yeah, I'm part of the history. I buy into our history. And I grew up there in Lincoln Heights to parents who, my dad, being born here and all my family on his side here. My mom an immigrant from Mexico, from Veracruz. In 1945, she immigrated. And she's now 92, so she's been here ever since. But they raised us in Lincoln Heights, working class background, working class parents, but yet they provided. They gave us a Catholic education from day one through high school, and I was fortunate enough to attend a Catholic university. So yeah, that's my background. I'm a good old Catholic schoolboy.
So at that time, was Dodger Stadium already created, or did they?
It was brand new.
At that time?
It was brand new. So my dad, being a minor leaguer, he played in the minor leagues in Colorado back in the late 40s, early 50s. He was an avid baseball fan, and when the Dodgers came to LA, he couldn't wait for the stadium to open, and so we were taking the Dodger Stadium when it was 1961. 1960 when we were still not even toddlers, and so, but I do recall being old enough to watch Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale and Johnny Roseboro, and all those famous Dodgers back in the day. So Dodger Stadium was brand new, and I share this with my students because as a young boy going to Chavez Ravine and watching the stadium, and it's like you hear it from other people, the stadium just takes you in, the green grass, the orange, dirt, and it was brand new. You know what it appeared to me? Like what Disneyland appeared to me, it was an experience at Disneyland. Everything was brand new. The people wore straw hats. The men wore blue blazers. They had those kind of megaphone, conical shaped horn. It was interesting. It was a different world, and I was watching on YouTube a 1965 World Series Classic at Dodger Stadium, and it brought back memories because I remember the umpires all in black, old school, and I'm thinking, God, I lived that. So anyways, yeah, Dodger Stadium was brand new. I had family in Chavez Ravine who were evicted. My godfather and his family lived in Chavez Ravine, and a lot of people were evicted, and he was a World War II veteran, and they had to go. They had to just find new homes in Lincoln Heights and Highland Park and so forth. But a lot of people were bulldozed, were moved out, and their homes were bulldozed down to make room for Dodger Stadium. But my dad didn't seem to bother my dad. He was a ball player, and he was
he was just you're right there. It's in your backyard.
Yeah. I used to see him I used to see him talking, with the ball players in the left field pavilion, and that back then he was talking to Juan Marshall, Rico Cardi, Tony Oliva, all these land players, and then he'd sit down and he would do the game card, he'd buy the game guide, and he would mark every inning with an X and every hit, RBI, and I'm thinking, Dad, you're not watching the game, and he goes, I have it right here, I have it all here, I know who hit, who stole it. But so anyways, those were my earliest memories, Dodger Stadium. But, I had aside from economics, we were doing okay. We weren't doing all that bad. We weren't living in poverty. It was just a struggle sometimes for my parents, but, somehow they found a way on my mom's insistence, really, to put us through Catholic school. And I think that's really what saved my brother. I'm one of three brothers, and it insulated us from some of the harsh realities that we saw growing up in our neighborhood, with the gangs and the drugs. And it was the 1960s, it was a lot of drugs. And so I think my mom, more so than my dad, shielded us from that, from those kinds of, if you will, being exposed to that. But yeah, I went through Catholic school and graduated from Cathedral High School, which is right next to Dodger Stadium. And I remember when we were there, during the World Series, all the cars would line up, and some of the seniors would ditch high school to go up to catch the game, and it was a lot of fun, going to school right next to Dodger Stadium, right down the hill now it's called Bishop's Road. Back then it was called Stadium Way. But, and we used to explore Dodger Stadium when we could, because we had friends who worked in it. So, underneath Dodger Stadium, there's tunnels.
Yeah.
There's tunnels, and we used to go into those tunnels and end up in some of those places we weren't supposed to as kids. We were teenagers, but harmless fun. But so I went to Cathedral High School, graduated, and then
what was that like, Pete? Can you share a little bit about what a Catholic high school was like?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, my whole Catholic education was a blast because we felt safe. We felt insulated from the tough guys, the bullies, the gangsters. And so we were free to express ourselves. And when we got to high school, it was an extension of our middle and elementary schools. It was an all-boys school, first of all. So we didn't have to worry about dressing up, trying to look, fancy. We went, there was guys who had long hair. Cathedral was a pretty open liberal school. So they had guys who had long hair in the 70s. That went down to their waist, and then the hippies, but they did well, and so so it was an all boys school. We did have events with the girls' schools, local girls' schools, but I think it was a solid education. The fact that we weren't distracted so much until after school with the girls, it kind of kept our eyes on the prize, and I felt I was pressured by my peers. If I saw them doing well, I didn't want to fall behind because there was kind of this unstated kind of indirect pressure. Hey, man, if you don't do this, you're going to fall behind. And so that was pretty interesting when I think back, reflect on this.
Well, I think about when you're there, did Cathedral have a great football team also?
Yeah. I mean, the
basketball great football team.
Yeah.
And then
right now they have
corporal
more so
punishment,
today.
Right?
Pardon?
How was the corporal punishment with the nuns?
Well, there were no nuns at Cathedral. There was all brothers.
Okay.
The Christian brothers, and they were pretty hip. They were pretty progressive. They weren't the conservative Catholic priests that you hear about at Notre Dame High School or somewhere else. These guys were kind of hippies themselves, but wore the collar. So they spoke to us. They spoke, not at us, but to us, and it was pretty cool. They were pretty open-minded people at Cathedral High School, as compared to other schools in LA, Catholic schools in the LA area. I've heard from Salesian High School or Canwa. So my experience at Cathedral was that it was a lot of unity and guys that were watching out for each other and keeping tabs on each other when we were falling off the mark with our grades and so forth. And we had brothers who would take us, have us go there on Saturdays just to further expose us to, hey, university, and this is what you need to do. And so they were on point with that. But Yeah, it was cool. We didn't miss the girls because the girls came afterwards, and we would drive to the girls' high schools and we had sock hops and dances. So, and that was cool, So we never had to dress up. We never had to worry about fashion. It was whatever you took out of, whatever you put on the previous day, you could wear it the whole week. It was nobody was watching. But and so from there, when I graduated, I went to Pasadena City College initially for 2 years, just to prep me up better for university. And I thought Pasadena City College was my first experience at a public school. And I was like kind of blown away. It's like, oh my God, what have I been missing? But at the same time, PCC back then, Pasadena City College was very prep oriented, very university oriented. It was kind of exposed me to what university might be like, because today it's much more diverse. Because I've been teaching there too since 2002 on an part-time basis. When I was there, it was predominantly white and middle class. It was like the kids from San Marino and Arcadia and, those kind of South Pasadena as well, and Altadena. But it seemed like it was it was a new experience to me coming from Lincoln Heights. I had never seen that particular demographic in all my classes, and I was like a minority for the first time in my classes. So I think that kind of prepared me for university indirectly, because I kind of saw what was going on. But I did 2 years at Pasadena City College, and then went on to LMU. But the major influences to why I continued with my schooling, starting with high school and even in middle school, was because of what was going on in the times in our country. And for us, there was the Chicano Movement. So I wasn't old enough to actively engage in it, but I was old enough to be invited to participate in it at some level. I was 12, 13 years old, so they brought us in, to protest, to be part of the protest. But that was a big influence. One, because it was around us, the walkouts. I grew up in Lincoln Heights, and Abraham Lincoln High School was the ground zero for the walkouts of East LA in 1968. And then, we saw the Brown Berets everywhere. We saw heavy police presence everywhere. And my mom, the activist she was involved in community theater, and she was also involved with the Bobby Kennedy campaign in 1968. So she exposed us to activism, either through theater or participating in rallies and those kinds of things. And my oldest brother actually danced for Robert F. Kennedy the week Robert F. Kennedy was in Los Angeles for the California primary. And so we have all that memorabilia. She kept it. So I was 9 years old, 10 years old, and 9 years old when Robert F. Kennedy was running for the president. So I saw all that, and I saw the walkouts, and I saw what was going on, and what was going on in Watts, and the Chicano movement. Yeah.
So for people who don't know, could you just describe the Chicano movement and
Sure.
just sort of a little synopsis of what that is?
Absolutely. If between 1965, beginning in 1965, really through 1975, which is about a 10-year period, there was a new social political movement in the Southwest and Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, and Michigan, even in the Midwest, Mexican Americans who were beginning to address the social and political inequalities of our day, at times, so that they began to coalesce and form socially, politically active organizations that were much more, if you will, militant, more so than our father's generation, and much more confrontational, because the Chicano movement was really one aspect, one spoke of that wheel of the countercultural revolution. So we as Chicanos in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, we kind of joined the countercultural revolution late, 1967, 1968. But there was already inklings as early as 1965, because, the 60s in America was countercultural. Everybody was, fighting, well, not everybody, but many university students were against the war, fighting the establishment. It was free drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Well, Chicanos got into it gradually. We come from a traditional values community. So many people don't, what does that mean? Well, we respect authority, law enforcement, we're church going, we're family oriented. So we're more of, we go along to get along. We do as we're told. We don't question. Our parents' generation didn't question as much, even though they were also politically active. So the Chicano movement was really reflective of the Black Power movement and the white students movement for social democracy, kind of those groups. And Asian American movements too, because the Japanese Americans here in LA and California were very involved too. So, it was this coalescing of sorts that I got to, I even get goosebumps thinking about it, that we saw these adults, young men and women, egging us on to join, and what do you do when you're, 8, 9 years old and you got adults? I mean, come on, join us, walk with us and hold a sign. And you're like jazzed. You're like, yeah, I can do this, And lo and behold, I think that's why I'm here in many ways. Because when my barber was cutting my hair and says, hey, you want to join us at a rally? And I'm in junior high school. I'm 12, 13 years old, and he's cutting my hair and says, why don't you join us at the rally? Why don't you be a part of it? And I'm wondering, 1971, what does that mean? 1977. Yeah, I'll go. And sure enough, I just saw a world of activists and culture and music. And it was really a multiracial, ethnic kind of vibe. So that I saw how people, locking arms that were of different groups, social groups and ethnic groups, race groups. So I said, that's beautiful, I grew up in Lincoln Heights, so we have a large historic Chinese American community. And then my mother, we also lived in Boyle Heights, was a strong Japanese American community. So we had Japanese American friends, families, and Chinese Americans, and we also had African Americans. So it was, and whites, because Lincoln Heights had a lot of Italians and Irish. And so I saw that. I saw the beauty of people locking arms, regardless of background. I said, oh, that's cool. I want to be a part of that. And so here I am, 20, years later, it stuck with me. And that's when I started realizing in high school that I wanted to do something for my people, which would have been the Chicano community. So the 1960s, the Chicano movement really exposed young people like myself to get involved, to try to be part of a community resolve and resolution to fight the good fight, And I think I learned the lessons from them early on enough where I started finding an attraction and appeal to pursuing history. One day I said I was in high school, at least I can be a history teacher, and that will allow me. I love history. And then one thing led me to another. I said, not only can I be a history teacher, I can be a Chicano studies teacher too if I really work hard. But it was that early exposure, and it really came not only from the community, but my parents, my mom, also my mom. In terms of, we have to be active. She supported political campaigns, local campaigns. She had this boundless energy, and I'm saying, wow, we can do this, So as a kid, I got exposed early on to the Chicano movement, even though, it was everywhere, where I thought it was everywhere. And by that I mean, not only in California, people might think it's just relegated to Southern California or California. I know it was in Michigan, it was in Wisconsin, it was in, Iowa, Davenport, Iowa. I mean, it was everywhere. Illinois, Indiana. And so I learned that later, right? But, I remember the day Ruben Salazar, a very prominent LA Times journalist, was killed because, that became like a rallying point for the community. He became a martyr in 1970. My dad had just finished painting. He was a sign painter, commercial artist, sign painter. He had just finished painting the exterior walls of the bar he was killed at like 2 weeks earlier. So I'm thinking, wow, this is, every time I show my students a video on the walkout, on the Chicano movement in 1970, you see my dad's artwork. He died there, he was shot dead by the sheriff deputy back in August of 1970, Ruben Salazar. And I saw the first magazines of his death that my parents bought, and that always stuck with me. Who killed this guy? Why did he have to die? And I think that's what started, allowed me to start opening up and having these questions about, who are we? And, why is this happening? And, Vietnam, why are we in Vietnam? And, so all these things kind of just snowballed, in my Catholic education. And they were, the brothers at Cathedral would say, war is wrong, and they were anti-war. And so all this prodding, it's a gradual kind of snowball effect where you're starting to realize, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on that, if you look around, like this song says, you can join and be a part of something really important. And I think that's what really propelled me and compelled me to act. And then it kind of gave me a social, what do you call that? A social consciousness. I think a lot of kids my age back then, if you're in your 60s and maybe late 50s or mid 60s, we grew up with that social consciousness because it wasn't that we were looking for it. They dropped it on you,
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
My father was sort of a little bit older than that generation.
Yeah.
But I grew up with a lot of these stories. And then when I went to UCLA in the 1990s, he goes, okay, look up my old civil rights people, and he, I went to Haynes Hall, Rolf Hall, I forget which one. And I went up to UCLA and the war was over. It was the Reagan times and nobody cared, right? And there was I was in that big gap between your generation and the current generation, which is now socially conscious and cares. And my generation was, let's just make some money.
Yeah.
So at PCC, at this point, did you have a firm understanding of this movement that you wanted to be a part of, or were you still experimenting?
No. By the time I left high school, I already had this inkling. When I got to PCC, I met my mentor that I still connect with, 45 years later, 40 years later. And so when I got to PCC, I just accidentally took a class with a professor who I realized I needed to take more of his classes. And he's the one that really became my intellectual father, so that by the time I got to university, I was, my wheels were spinning already because of this professor at Pasadena City College. Had I not gone there, I don't know. I wonder. But he was the person I was looking for without knowing it, because when I took his classes, I realized I want to do this, and so I forced a relationship in terms of, being that student that's always, at his office and picking his brain, and because he wasn't that open, but once he realized I wasn't going away, he started kind of opening up and talking more to me because I was asking all these questions, and he realized that I was very passionate about what he was teaching. And so PCC is really what launched me. That's when I realized, okay, this is what the road I need to take. So I'm very, very grateful for that we happen to cross paths, because, it's been 40 years. It's been 45 years, it's been 42 years. And we still have a mentor relationship, but, he retired already, but still I keep tabs with him because, he's a very important part of my life as a professor. And, it's no coincidence my students read his books,
Quick question for you, Pete. One thing I just want to say, thank you for providing such a great recount of in such a short way the Chicano movement in LA. It's fantastic to hear you sharing it from your perspective and as a professor. So it was much appreciated.
You're welcome.
In terms of Pasadena, at that point when you were there and taking the class with this professor, and I'm also going to ask if you can share who the professor was. The Chicano Studies Department at Cal State LA was founded it was 1968, I think.
Yeah.
It was PCC. Did they have any Chicano Studies classes when you were there, or was it a history class?
No, they weren't Chicano Studies. They were history classes, general U.S. history classes. But he was able to teach not only history and sociology, even anthropology, with a Mexican-American perspective. And why that work clicked for me was because, many social historians teach history from a social historical perspective. Some use economics and, class analysis. He used a Catholic analysis to our study of Mexican-American history. So, embedded in my learning was a reinforcement, really, of my Catholic education. because many professors don't teach, that at a public secular college or university. But the fact that he employs and incorporates our Catholic history as Chicanos and Mexican Americans, it makes sense to me that as Catholics, Mexican American Catholics, very different from Anglo Catholics, and Anglo American Catholicism, in the Southwest, it goes back to the 1600s. So the oldest form of most people don't realize that Spanish-speaking Catholics predated English-speaking Catholics, and that's just historical, but it speaks to my sense of place, because when I go to New Mexico and I go to Texas or here in California, our Catholic history is very much a part of our presence and our identity, but no one really likes to talk about it because, who likes to talk about, religion? And I don't, but I know it's a part of our faith, it's a part of our history. And that's what's important, because a lot of our students are gun shy to, and they kind of join the bandwagon, say, what our religion, I said, okay, it's fine. But, so that's what made the difference, I think. The fact that I saw myself as, and then I ended up at a Jesuit university of all places, because when I left PCC, I got accepted to UC San Diego and Loyola University, right? And so I went to my mentor. I said, hey, I got accepted to these two places. And so I just went with Loyola because it was familiar to me, the fact that it was a Catholic university, and I had no idea what the Jesuits were going to do to me, in terms of taking me to the next level. But, liberation theology was something that, I embraced. And so anyways, it kind of went hand in hand with Chicano studies. And when I was there, the president of the university, Dr. Father Merrifield, who was a Jesuit priest, he was very pro Chicano. He used to kind of hang out with our community and really did a lot to keep us at the university in terms of, financial aid and awards and those kinds of things. So I saw how some Jesuits are very open to other Catholics who were not necessarily, white Catholics, whatever. But yeah, there's that, it's all kind of just a mumbo jumble of stuff, but that's a part of it, Scott.
So Pete, when you were transferred to Loyola, did you transfer as a history major?
Actually, I transferred as a sociology major. Yeah. And I was a sociology major, and then I quickly shifted out of it because I found education much more enticing to me. So I switched to the education department program, and I got my education degree, my teaching degree from Loyola Marymount. Yeah. So I left sociology, but I studied the sociology of education, those kind of things, and the psychology of education, but I still wanted to teach. And I started as an elementary school teacher. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then gradually I realized I was only going to be there temporarily while I worked on my advanced degree, so I could, try to go where I wanted to go, which was community college. I always wanted to teach because I came out of a community college for 2 years, and I saw that the largest amount of our students of my ethnic background are at community college, and I think that's where I thought I could do the best in terms of reaching out to the most, which is at a community college. And so, that's where I've been, but yeah.
So when you graduated from Loyola then, and you got your degree in education, what elementary school did you teach at, and how long were you there for? How did that go?
I was teaching in the El Monte City School District, east of Los Angeles, and in the Monroeville High School, because I started to work into the higher grades. But I started at El Monte City School District, El Monte City School District, and I quickly also taught elementary school there, and more so I got into counseling to work with children and parents, so that I became I was hired by the state of California as an educational consultant to work at that district as an outreach counselor as well. So I got to work with the community because they went hand in hand. It was like pulling teeth sometimes. But so I saw my work there critical to where I was going, because I was able to spend time with not only the children I was working with, but their families and their parents, and trying to get them to buy into what we were trying to do, which was to keep their children on track. And with a little humility, little modesty, little respect, it goes a long way with our community. Once they realize you're not there to preach, or you're not there to, hurt them, or maybe think less of them, they will bend over backwards, man. Once you have parents over on your side, they will do and provide and for their children and for the school. And we had monies. We've won beach trips on Saturdays. The hardest thing was to get the fathers involved because, very traditional, very, so very patriarchal. So once I got them, the mothers, no. The mothers are always there. It was the dads. And I would tell the dads, you have to be here for your boys and your son and your daughter. So once I got them going and we talked about their pueblos and their small towns in rural Mexico, and I was able to connect with them and relate to them, even though, my experience was different, they realized that they were teaching me things about their lives. And once they found a place of balance and equality where we were working together, they couldn't do enough for us, They couldn't do enough. They just wanted to be there. And I saw that only because, of the mutual respect we had for each other. Because they're hardworking men, but sometimes, they get caught up in their own lives and their own tradition, their own value systems. But if you kind of just work with them, that's what I found the greatest pleasure. Working with the kids and the fathers, because the mothers seemed like they were always going to be there. But it was their husbands that I had to convince that their participation, what we did, was pivotal. And, so El Monte City School District, and I was there for about 6 years before I left it to come to Cal State LA. I taught at Cal State LA and the Chicano Studies Department at the university here at Cal State LA with some of my mentors there, and they asked me to teach. So I taught for them. I taught at the university there for about a year and a half, and then that job I couldn't keep both, so I had to leave El Monte to work at Cal State LA because that's where I wanted to, at that level, teach at somewhere on that level. And that's when Valley College, a year later, came knocking and opened up a position. And so I was 1 year, I remember, between teaching at the university and waiting for a full-time gig. I was unemployed for 1 year, and luckily my wife was employed. She didn't mind it. She knew I had to do this just to get the experience. And lo and behold, Valley College came knocking and opened up a position. I applied, and I didn't think I was going to get it. Actually, one of my fellow buddies who went to graduate school with, he was working at Valley College, and he had the job, and he was a full-time, non-tenured full-timer. And so he had the job for about 3 years, I believe, and then they opened it up for a tenured position. I said, well, I'm going to go practice. I need to practice interviews. And a whole bunch of us went right out of grad school, about 5 or 6 of us. And we all kind of just met, had lunch afterwards, and we said, hey, well, that was a good run, right? We practiced this and that. And then I got the call, and I was like, I was shocked. I said, oh, shoot, okay. And I started at Valley College. Yeah.
So how was your life different at Valley College than it was at the El Monte School District? Like, what adjustments did you have to make?
It was obviously, the learning at Valley, the education at Valley College. It's, the difference being is that the students that are at Valley College want to be there. They're trying their hardest to do well in their studies, and it's not of having to like pulling teeth with some of these students. At El Monte, they're just going through the motions, and a lot of the teenagers are they're kind of walking zombies. They're lost, and there's this kind of sense of hopelessness that I hated to see. But at Valley College, I saw a lot of students who were hungry for acknowledgement, for validation. And once I felt I could provide them the validation and acknowledgement that they belong there, then they realized that they could succeed, and it wasn't a fearful place. So that the students that I've been fortunate to work with, I've seen the majority of them, many of them, I can tell they're hungry for validation and acceptance. And if you can get beyond that and let them know that you validate their presence, you accept them because I lived it, and I'm a role model for them, then they'll start believing that they can, and that they can perform, and that if they fail, it's not the end of the world. because a lot of times with my students, I share my failures because I tell them, I learned from my failures, I love history, and I failed a history class when I was at Pasadena City College, and the professor loved me, and she was very good. and she always called on me, and I was always asking, but I wasn't the best exam taker. So don't fear failure, because we learn from our failures. So our students, they just need and you guys know this, they just need a little, an arm around their shoulder and a little push and some understanding and some stop and talk to them and listen to what they're saying. And I know you guys know this and you guys practice this, but man, it's so easy to win them over. It's so easy, especially our kids who come from these very, adverse backgrounds and difficult backgrounds. If they trust you, the rest is easy, in terms of what they're learning. So it's not so much the academics, they're going to get it, but it's the emotional learning that they want to be a part of, that they want that recognition. And it's not major recognition. It's only recognition that they're an individual with individual needs and concerns and fears and those kinds of things and dreams. Because I tell a lot of my young lady students will say, I want to be a nurse. And they're all in a nursing program. And then I kind of kid in the classroom, I kid around with them and say, did you ever think you wanted to be a medical doctor? Honestly, did you ever think about, wearing the kill, stethoscopes? And they said, yeah, but they say it's a long time. And drop all that, for all the times I was told that why was I pursuing a degree in Chicano studies is not going to get me anywhere. All those people were wrong, If you really want to go to medical school, and nursing school is a great profession, by the way, I tell them. It's a wonderful, beautiful profession. But if you had a fantasy or a dream about being a medical doctor, don't give it up because someone told you you're not going to be able to put up with it. You're not going to be able to do it. It's too long. This is not for you. Don't buy into that. So that's the challenge, to get them to think outside the box about themselves. And I find that, for me, energizing, because when I can, give them some feel good medicine, that's what I like doing.
Yeah, the content of my math is never going to change. I'm teaching stuff that was discovered. Some of the stuff was discovered like thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
We haven't improved it yet. We're never going to improve it. But the people, pretty wonderful. Every semester you get a new group of people, pretty wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
So I've got this question. So, growing up, I don't think I've always discounted Chicano studies, not understanding how important it was for someone to feel like they belonged at school.
Absolutely.
In terms of Chicano students that are in your class, when they take your class, what history surprises them most? Because I have students all the time go like, I'm a Chicano, I lived in LA all my life. Yeah. How are you going to surprise me? And then they go, and they're always shocked, and they go, none of this was in any history book I ever read.
Right. Yeah. And that's the kind of the inherent beauty of it is that, but that's my challenge is that I give them nuance, and depending on what history class, if they want to take an early pre-Columbian history class, they're going to know who was drinking hot chocolate and who was doing what and who was doing the dance. And it's not just history. It's people who make history. So I like to get into the nuts and bolts of character personalities about these Moctezuma or, Cortez or the Alamo. I deconstruct that. I say, look, it was more than just what we learned in school, because Chicano studies is really designed to, if you will, challenge the historical narrative in our country that says this is what happened in the Southwest to these people. And that's it. It's like with Native American history. So what my challenge is to my, especially those of my community is to let's think outside the box. This is not only what happened, but these things happened too. And there was people just like you in your 20s who were willing to stand up in their time against a very difficult government that was repressive and oppressive. And would you be able to do that? Would you be able to stand up to the Texas Rangers because they are harassing your parents and they want your parents out of their house because they want to take it? Those kind of those little nuances, but then go back to the history lesson. But say, there was people your age that were having to draw the line too, and they had to make decisions to defend their households and their livelihoods for their folks. Or, African Americans weren't the only ones who saw estranged fruit, In the lynchings in Texas and California were, also very well known in our history. But so that's the challenge, is that we take history out of the box and say, look, history is a multifaceted organism. It's just not one perspective. We got to look at different perspectives. And I like to include other groups in my history classes because it wasn't just us. It was poor whites. It was the Chinese exclusion. When they were here, it was the Japanese during the war. What I want to do is make it universal, so that I'm not trying to play the victim, the victimization cards. It's not just. It's how socioeconomics and empires work. The Greeks did this, the Romans did this, the Aztecs did this. No one is immune from repressing, in the march to empire, the people they live amongst. And so our country did it, but we're no different than the Romans or the Greeks. But we did it, and we're, still doing it in some ways, not militarily, but economically around the world. But if we can connect what I teach with the modern world, and put, our history, the social context of our history of the 19th century in the modern day, and say, let's compare. Then they start getting it. They start writing about it. Say, no, you know what? Our time was not much different from what they went through. And boy, are we tired. And I get some long-winded essays about, man, when does this stop? When does the madness stop? And I'm saying, well, it's only going to stop when you get involved. Only when you get involved and know you're going to do this for our grandchildren and everyone's grandchildren. We can't have our great-grandchildren living like this. So if you don't like this, then what are you going to do about it? How are you going to be part of the solution? And so we get into those kinds of discussions as well to make it real, make it contextual. It's not, I don't want them just to see history from a book. It's beyond the book, outside the books, and we look around LA and say, look around LA. What is the oldest place of Los Angeles? The Alvera Street. It's the historic plaza. You have the oldest skyscraper there, the Sepulveda Hotel. North Hollywood has Campo Cahuenga, where Mexico surrendered California in 1849. Who knows that? There was a battle called the Battle of Cahuenga on North Lankershim Boulevard and Cahuenga Boulevard. No one knows this, No one knows this. There was the Mexican army was fighting the American armies right on North Lankershim Boulevard. And no one knows this because no one, our history is really not incorporated. So, but now that what are you going to do about it? How are you going to, what are you going to do with this information? Yeah.
I tell my students that when you look at the photos of the people who sort of made in the 60s who made change, and John Lewis was 19.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, these people who made change were all our students' age.
Yes.
They were not the old people. They were the young people who made this change.
They took the beatings.
Diane Nash, who led the bus ride from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans. I mean, she was what, 20? 21?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's
so when you look at these pictures, what I try to show my students is, look how young they look. They're your age.
Yeah.
They're just wearing old people clothing. it's patched out, but they're basically the same age as you. It's not old people who bring change. It's young people who bring change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I tell my students. I tell them the same thing. I say, we're too old to run after people. You guys have the energy, and the same thing happened in the 1800s, early 1900s. It's how communities find resolve, and are resolute. But it means sacrifice and bringing people together and commiserating and trying to figure out what path to take. So there's a lot here beyond history that we want to discuss and we want to think about, because we're still living in a time, very precarious time, where what's going on. January 6th has been sadly and unfortunately some kind of blessing for me, because now my lectures now they resonate with with what happened on January 6th. I'm saying, those same people who raided the Capitol on January 6th were the same people who raided San Antonio, Texas at the Alamo. It's sadly, it's a historic character aspect of the American character, in the sense that people take the law into their own hands, and it's not new. January 6th should not shock us. If you saw the South in the 1960s and 1950s, there was a lot of violence in the South, even here in the Watts riots of 65. So I said, there is this sad, underpinning of that character type that's always, kind of just there hiding in the wings, ready to just bolt out. But we have to be mindful and aware, of these kinds of, ideas, because we're never too far from, and I tell my students, there's always a Hitler hiding in the bushes, there's always someone that wants to take from others what, doesn't belong to them. So it's always a concern. And I think students buy into it. I think for the most part, especially Chicano kids, the students, like you asked, they're very limited in terms of just American history, let alone their history. So when I talk about the Aztec empires, the Mayan empires, the fact that they invented the zero cipher in this Western hemisphere, they created rubber in 2000 BC, they vulcanized rubber. I say, look, go to the dictionary, see who gets the credit for vulcanizing rubber. Mr. Goodyear. It's in the books. It's in the dictionary. The Mayans had rubber. The Olmecs were working with rubber at 2500 BC. They vulcanized it. They found a way to vulcanize rubber in their own way, but they had rubber balls. They had rubber items. So we don't know this, because that's buried history. That's buried knowledge. Your ancestors had a lot to provide. Sadly, all that went away because the libraries were destroyed by the Spanish. So we have to realize that, that as well, but, so they start thinking, all I want to do is have them, if I can see that the light bulb's turned on then I'm happy. And some don't, some just want to do it, get out, do their time and take my class and get out. And that's okay. I can't turn on everybody either, and I don't expect to, but those that I see in the crowd, in the midst there, thinking and pondering, that's the ones that, and I just got a call yesterday from a student. She just got accepted to UCLA. She's a Chicano Studies major. She just got accepted she got her acceptance, email, and she's put on hold at Berkeley. She's on a wait list at Berkeley. And I'm thinking, God bless you, this is what was meant for you. You were a hard working student. You earned this, embrace it. And she was so excited. She's going to UCLA because she wants to do the Chicano Studies program there. But I always tell my students, John, and say, where are my next generation of professors out here? Who wants to take my job? It's a good gig. Money's good. Hours are great. And I love if you can find something you love, it's never work, right? So I said, I know there's a whole bunch of, think about it, people, because I was never told that. I said, where's the next generation of professors? I'm not going to be here forever. Who's going to teach my grandchildren this stuff the right way, And they all start thinking about it. I just want to put that seed in their mind. Come back to Valley College, I tell them. Go get your degrees and come back to Valley College and turn on the next generation. Someone's got to do it.
Let me ask you this question. I ask everyone this. So then, for someone who wanted to have your job, what recommendation, what is the great advice that you would give him or her?
I would say my best advice would be read everything that you can about the world, not just about Chicano studies, because we're all interrelated. If you have a chance, like I did, take English history, I took medieval history. I took a nuclear assault treaty class at Loyola. I was absorbing. I said, you got to just read all you can about the world so that you can relate to it, but also read everything we're doing. But you got to read. The key to me, is reading as much as you can about not just what we do, but about everything else. Whether it's the Vietnam War, whether it's the war in Afghanistan, whether it's international relations, it's all connected. So I tell my students, because they ask me, well, where did you get all this information from? I said, well, I give them a list of authors, read this, read that, read, the Irish, read the Irish historians or the poets, read, what is it, the medieval period and the histories coming out of Northern Europe. Get a sense of place, and then read the Aztec histories, read our histories here in this country, and don't just read general histories, read biographies. Read about these individuals who created our country and what was motivating them. So if you have a chance to read a book on Lincoln, read it. If you have a chance to read a book by William Faulkner, read it. Take English American literature serious. Because it's going to come back to you. You're going to be able to use that. And so it kind of works out for some, and they start probing. But that's my best advice is to read as much as you can while you can. And I tell my students this, once you start realizing that learning can be fun, because you love reading, even a paper gum wrapper could be interesting, taking the right perspective, about bazooka. Even a gum wrapper can be interesting if you see it that way. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid to just go into a library and just start reading. You have Kindle, you have, everything now. Read India, read Chopra, read all these different writers, there's never going to be enough time to read everything in this world. So whether it's Gibbons or anywhere else, the Roman histories. So that's what I tell them. To me, that would work for me. I can't tune up a car. I can't change the oil. I break everything around here, so I've been banned from using hammers and tools by my family because I break things. But I can read. I can read all day if I. So that's my advice. My advice to students: if you can just read and enjoy it, enjoy reading. And music. Read Miles Davis. Read about John Coltrane. Read about all these different Duke Ellington. Read about American greatness too, and see because they were fighting it. Billie Holiday, the movie that just came out. You got to read their stories too. Yeah, reading to me, reading is key. It opened up a world to me that I never perceived.
Pete, with that in mind, I know, guys, we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I wanted to ask you a question that I think connects the dots, but kind of jumps back a little bit in the story here. I don't know if we heard where you went to grad school at and sort of how you decided, what to do there. Can you share that real quickly?
Absolutely. My grad school years?
Yeah.
Yeah. At grad school, I applied to the Chicano Studies program, the Mexican American Studies, Chicano Studies program at Cal State LA. Because I live next door to the university, and to me it was feasible. They have a great program there, and I got some great mentors there in Chicano literature. Dr. Roberto Cantu took me to a world. I was reading the Irish writers. I was reading the English writers, David Said, all these great writers about the social political complex problems of whether it's Southern Ireland or England and the Arab British and the Arab relations. Yeah, Cal State LA. To me, that was second to none. I'm so thankful I went there because of what I was able to learn and be trained at graduate level by, especially people like Dr. Roberto Cantu, who just took me to the next level in terms of, because he was an English professor and he just dumped all his knowledge on Joyce and Said and Chomsky, and I'm like, what's this? So Cal State LA's Chicano Studies program, Mexican American Studies program is where I attended as a part-time student because I was a full-time employee back in El Monte. And as soon as I got my degrees, my MA, they asked me if I would teach as an adjunct. And I said, yeah, it would be an honor. And, so at Cal State LA, Scott, and, I recommend Cal State LA to all my students. I know most go to Northridge, but I said explore Cal State LA, the Chicano Studies program, and that's where I attended, and I really learned a lot from being there, from some of those professors that I use their books now in my classes, and
That's great, Pete. Thank you for sharing that part of the story. And I have one last question for you. Sure. Who's your mentor at PCC?
Dr. Enrique Orozco, C. Orozco. And Dr. Orozco is a product of Van Nuys You know, he was born and raised in Van Nuys, and he got his got his PhD in history from USC. He taught at Northridge. He taught at PCC. That's where he taught most of his years, all his life. And I believe Cal State Dominguez Hills. He was also the basketball coach there. But yeah, Dr. Enrique Cardosa Orozco, Dr. Orozco, who he was the dean at PCC, and just retired maybe 5 years ago. I think he taught maybe like 45 years there, because I took him 1979, and he just retired maybe 5 years ago. You know, so and he was already there. You know, so and he published some very good books that I use in my classes. But yeah, he's a product of Van Nuys and USC in terms of his graduate studies and so forth. But yeah, that's my mentor, Dr. Orozco. Yeah, product of the Valley, San Fernando Valley. Yeah.
Thank you, Pete.
You're welcome, Scott. You're welcome.
My goodness, I have to say this has been one of my favorite podcasts and opportunities to interview a professor at the college. I just want to say thank you so much for taking time this afternoon, and thank you for being such an important part of the college. I mean, I hear all the time from students, and I have for, you know, the last 10, 15 years that I've been at the college, about what an amazing professor you are and how you're a perennial favorite of the students.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for that. I appreciate your kind words and thoughts. And yeah, you know, it's not even, yeah, you're right. You know, it's the students make you and break you, and you live and die by your reputation. And I put I do raise the stakes with these guys. You know, I don't let them off the hook easy. I raise the bar. I raise expectations. At the same time, I put my arm around them and say, it's all right, man. We're going to get through this together. And even those who go on and move on to university, I say, I'm here. You know, things happen, which will, when you're at university, I'm only an email away. So that's the beauty of my job. The career I have is that I get to help mold young minds into embracing not just us, but the total humanity. You know, respect everyone, not just us. Now, don't be that person who's going to just dislike because that's the thing to do. No, that's what we're fighting against. So we have to embrace the humanity of who we are, and you know, whether we're Chicano or not. And what you learn in my classes, you're going to be able to apply it in other ways in the real life and with other groups. So you know, we need to learn that mutual love and respect for each other, because that's really what this is all about. It's not about, you know, taking ours and that. No, on the contrary, you know. So that's the beauty of this job, and I mean, it's a job. You know, I don't call it a job. It's a vocation. It's a sacred. I tell my students it's a sacred trust. You know, I have a sacred trust with you guys. I only have 2 years, because I know you're gonna move on. So in the meantime, I want to do my darnest to get you ready for university, you know, or wherever you're going. You might want to be a firefighter or a nurse, but you're going to use Chicano studies in your nursing career. I kid you not, or as a firefighter. And when another person comes up the ladder and they're like you're struggling, then you have to also be responsible and feel the obligation to help them up, no matter whom they are, you know, because we all work together. So that's fun. I look forward to that.